Hello, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Starr, CMO of D-Fend Solutions. I'd like to warmly welcome you once again to our webinar series. Our webinar series as a whole is entitled Control for Clear Skies, Counter-Drone Concepts for Airports. This is the second session, the second webinar in the series. And whereas the first session, we kind of took a step back and looked at some history, some regulatory frameworks. In this session, session 2, we're going to drill down and talk specifically about counter-drone preparation and prevention for airports. Before we jump right into that, I want to transition a little bit. First, of course, this webinar series is brought to you by D-Fend Solutions. Quick overview on who we are and what we do. We're the leading counter-drone, that is counter-SUAS cyber takeover technology provider with a global market presence. We have hundreds of deployments around the world in airports, military, national security, homeland security, infrastructure settings. We're in over 15 countries, including 4 of the 5 I countries, 5 of the G7. We're deployed over 5 continents, and we have a major presence in airports, including a large country airport where we're actually have a presence with a large percentage of the international passengers arriving and departing. The company's grown quite significantly over the past 2 years. We're well over 150 people now, with offices all around the world, as you can see. So you can see on the slide. Now, the background, and this is where we're going to transition a bit from the previous session that some of you may have attended. There's been an extraordinary increase at airports, and in general, the number of incidents involving drones coming close to airports. We call it the incessant increase in incidents. And in the last session, we reviewed this timeline. You all know about the infamous event at Gatwick in 2018, which affected more than 1,000 flights and resulted in huge financial costs. But that really was just the beginning, the kind of breakthrough in awareness, and they've been nonstop ever since. And we went over a number of these incidents. I won't go over all of them now, but you can see there were more at Newark, Heathrow, Dubai, Dublin, Frankfurt, all different kinds of incidents, often resulting in flights being diverted or some sort of operational business discontinuity, some sort of disruption, some sort of potential incident. And that's just been going on nonstop up into the current time. Even with the COVID, meaning less reduced airport activity, that didn't stop from an incident perspective, these incessant increase in the number of incidents. So the incidents were kept coming, and we also reviewed the different types of threats. That sometimes it could be a near collision, a terrible accident. Sometimes it could be a deliberate attack. Other times it might be surveillance or espionage. And we kind of reviewed all those different types. And we also spent a bit of time with the technology, and we're going to spend much more time on the technology and how some practitioners are addressing and deploying technology now. But one of the interesting areas we talked about was the fact that legacy, traditional, historical counter-SUAS solutions that were developed on the battlefield were not necessarily relevant or not necessarily optimized or suitable for civilian airports. And we talked about that both on the detection side and on the mitigation side, where you have great technologies that still have their role and that do fulfill a great purpose, such as radar, optical, acoustic, and directional finder, but yet which have certain shortcomings in crowded or dense or urban or civilian, of course, airport environments. We know that radars, for example, might detect other objects such as birds, causing false positives. We know optical requires clear line of sight, which may be a challenge in urban environments where you have tall buildings around airports. We know, for example, acoustic technology may have challenges as drones become increasingly quiet and, of course, in a noisy airport environment. And then even more on the mitigation side, the challenges caused by traditional mitigation technologies, which are problematic at the airport. Of course, jamming and kinetic are the 2 traditional technologies, but we know an airport where you have communications, where you have security communications. You don't want that element of signal disruption, and jamming, of course, is only temporary until the jamming ends and the pilot can regain control of the drone. And then kinetic, any kind of physical shooting, a projectile, obviously in an airport environment is very problematic, whether it be the projectile itself. If it misses the drone, could obviously hit something else. And even if it hits the drone, you have the falling drone. So we talked about all the problematic elements of traditional technologies, which again have their role, but have certain shortcomings in an airport environment. Now we're going to shift and we're going to get very practical with some insights from the field. And we're going to talk about some of these threats and some of these incidents that we've seen, and what are some of the new best practices and approaches that professionals at today's airports are adopting in order to start to contend with this threat in the context of a shifting regulatory and incident environment in history. Michael Huerta is going to join us. He was with us on the previous webinar as well. We're very happy to have him back again. Michael, of course, is the former head of the FAA. He has 3 decades of experience with airports and airport safety. He helped oversee the National Airspace System, and especially relevant, he was co-chair of a Blue Ribbon Task Force on UAS mitigation at airports. In addition to Michael, we have 2 new guest speakers directly from the field, directly from actual airports who are contending with this situation in the field on a daily operational basis. We have Antonio Nevarez. He's the Assistant Director of Aviation Operations and Security at El Paso International Airport. And El Paso International Airport has some very interesting, unique characteristics and environmental factors that Tony's going to elaborate on. And with a different perspective from a different type of airport, we have Brad Christopher. He's the Assistant Director of Airports at Wichita Airport Authority. He's been in that position for 14 years, and previously he's really been around the airport environment. He was also Director of Operations and Maintenance at the airport for a different period of 7 years. So he's really been in cross-functional, really all the different aspects of security and operations and safety at an airport. So these are our very distinguished panel speakers. We're really, really happy to have them, and they're each going to give kind of their different take or their different perspective on it. Michael's going to kind of focus on, how airports are starting to deal with this threat and the different operational approaches and best practices. And then Tony and Bradley are going to kind of focus on what their airports have been doing to prepare, their own sort of history of how they've been dealing with these incidences and their operational approach toward this emerging drone issue, including very specific native, local, and regional issues that they have to contend with, and that may vary from airport to airport. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Michael.
Well, hello, everyone. And Jeffrey, thanks for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen and get us started. Okay, I'm going to spend a little time on a high level talking about the drone threat as it relates to airports. And I think an important place to start is, while we're talking about the drone threat, it is important to acknowledge and recognize that drones provide significant benefits to the larger economy and also in the aviation and airport environment. They can be deployed in very dangerous situations. They're being widely used for things like power line inspections, where you would otherwise have to have people climbing very tall and dangerous towers, or putting themselves potentially in harm's way dealing with high voltage situations. They're being widely used to save lives. There are endless stories out there about search and rescue in inaccessible areas. They're also being used to deliver critical supplies in remote areas, such as healthcare supplies or emergency response supplies. They're also being used in the airport environment for things like inspections of runways and critical infrastructure that is deployed on airports. Airlines are using them for inspection of aircraft. And so there are a lot of benefits with unmanned aircraft. And given the wide range that are provided, we should expect to see more and more of them. The downside is that the rapid proliferation of drones in recreational and commercial use, just the sheer numbers. There's something like 900,000 that are currently registered in the United States. And many of the users of drones are not familiar with aviation practice, airspace procedures, and most importantly, limitations. Education is something that the FAA and many in the industry have been focused on, and the FAA also has a program for licensing drone operators. But the potential for hazards is when drones venture into places where they should not be. And this proliferation of drones presents challenges for integration into the aviation system, as well as for maintaining safety and security. Just to compare, that 900,000 that are currently registered in the US, that is more than triple the number of commercial aircraft, including general aviation aircraft, that are currently registered here in the US. And so it is a very significant challenge, and it is important to ensure that drones do not show up where they should not be. So going to the next slide. Airports are an attractive target, and I think the important takeaway here is there are a lot of them here in the US. There are some 5,000 that are public use airports, but we have 3 times that number that are private airports. And they come in many different shapes and sizes, but all of them depend on having very secure airspace and very secure operations on the ground in order to operate efficiently. And security concerns are increasing. For over 10 years, policymakers have struggled with the unique safety and security challenges that are posed by this new and emerging type of aircraft. In 2016, while the FAA was working on enabling regulation to allow more legal uses of unmanned aircraft, the national security community here in the US blocked further enabling regulations until this question of security could be addressed. Jeffrey already mentioned the disruption of operations at Gatwick Airport, which really got worldwide news in 2018. And that really added a lot of urgency to addressing the potential threats that are posed by drones. And it resulted in the Blue Ribbon Task Force on UAS Mitigation at Airports being commissioned a year later, which I had the privilege to co-chair. A little bit of a deeper dive in the Blue Ribbon Task Force. It was chartered by the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, or AUVSI, working in collaboration with Airports Council International North America. It was, and that's significant because essentially what you had were the organizations that represent the interests of further expanding the use of drones with the association that is responsible for looking out for the interests of airports. And they came together and brought together a collection of experts to really focus on how do we address this problem. The task force operated in a very transparent and a very collaborative fashion, and it produced a report that called for clear delineation of roles between the security and aviation authorities at the national level. It recognized that airport security is a shared responsibility between law enforcement agencies at the federal, state, and local level. It also recognized that there are different authorities that exist at those levels. And we recommended that certain authorities be granted to state and local law enforcement agencies, which are currently held exclusively at the federal level. And finally, we recommended that there be standards for counter-UAS systems. As Jeffrey pointed out in his introduction, a lot of the technology that had been developed to date at that time was very focused, it had a military legacy. And while it was very effective in working in a battlefield context, there are unique characteristics of airports that you need to be sensitive to ensure that they can be operated safely in the civilian environment. At the same time that all of this has been going on, the regulatory landscape for drones has continued to evolve. Over the last 5 or 6 years, you have seen that there have been a lot of things that have happened at the governmental level to try to do a better job of keeping track of drones through the aircraft registry, regulations that authorize limited operations, and establish operator qualification standards. Sort of, you can think of it as a sort of like a license to operate if you are providing commercial operations. Starting just a couple of years ago, the FAA started to issue operating certificates to companies to actually provide drone deliveries. And just in the last year, we've seen additional guidelines and rules published for how drones identify themselves, how they conduct operations over people or operations at night. At the current time, the FAA, working in collaboration with other agencies, is evaluating UAS detection and mitigation systems, which will hopefully result in some standards of how these systems should operate. And finally, just a few months ago, the FAA called on airports in the US to develop an unmanned aircraft system response plan. Well, the COVID crisis of the last 18 months had resulted in 2020 in a dramatic decline in airport passengers everywhere. And investments in new areas, including counter-UAS systems, were deferred by many airports. They were much more focused on investing in those things to keep their airports operating in times of reduced traffic, and ensuring that they had the resources to deal with a very tough economic challenge. This year, however, we've seen a rapid rebound in air traffic, particularly in domestic markets here in the US. And just starting this week, we're starting to see a significant increase in international travel. And so now, as airports are focused on rebuilding their traffic, they need to consider the continuing evolution of the potential hazard that are posed by unmanned aircraft. They need to recognize that the regulatory landscape will continue to evolve, but I think the most important thing is they need to stay ahead of this emerging industry, the potential threat that it represents to airports, and develop appropriate plans for responding to an incident should it occur. In the rest of the presentation today, you are going to hear from some experts in the field that are focused on what they can do to what they've been doing to respond to the counter-UAS threat, and how their airports are planning for and developing the response, and what they're doing to ensure that their airport is prepared for the possibility for a counter-UAS threat. So Jeffrey, back to you.
Excellent, great. That provides a perfect background. And now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to hear directly from the practitioners, if you will, in the field. And we'll start with Tony Nevarez at El Paso International Airport. Tony, take it over.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be on board with Mr. Christopher and Administrator Huerta, be part of this panel. Thank you for letting me participate, Jeffrey. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and kind of tell you what we've been doing in El Paso. So we have not had really the luxury of waiting for the FAA, and I think you could see my screen. Is that correct? Okay. So what we've done as a team, we started meeting together with the first IPP, initiative, and we got together with a few of our community members, which include the county, some of the cities, the University of Texas at El Paso, and some law enforcement partners. And then we kind of built on that with Texas Department of Public Safety, Fort Bliss, DOD, and law enforcement at the federal level. So what we really recognize, obviously we didn't get selected for the IPP, but we realized we could all work together and share resources, training, our waivers and response plan. And one of the first things we did was to go out and test some of these UAS detection systems. And, obviously we met a few people that promised the world and didn't really return a whole lot of results. So as we kind of moved along, it was important for us just kind of give you an overview of what El Paso airspace looks like. It's obviously not DFW, New York, or Washington, but we do have a complex airspace where we have the border to Mexico south of us. We have a mountain range to the west of our airport, 2 military installations to the north of us, and we share with kind of overlapping airspace with a military Class D airspace. So the other thing that's really important for us at the beginning of this was that we do have a lot of low-level helicopter and law enforcement, helicopters flying at around the 500 and 1,000-foot level. So really our initial thing was, aside from protecting commercial aviation, we wanted to protect those pilots who are out there on missions. And really, we were kind of assuming that the drones would be operating around that level. Didn't have a whole lot of data, but we moved forward and kind of wanted to protect that. So we did purchase a few detection software, detection antennas, all passive. And we started to realize quickly what we had out there. And one of our first detections was 65 feet just south of one of our runways, 26 left. And we notified the tower, and it was so early in the game that the tower asked us, the airport, if we had authorized that flight. And obviously we realized that there was a real disconnect because the airport cannot authorize a flight at that level. We didn't know what the intentions were. And at the same time, we're seeing some of this stuff here you'll see on the screen where we were getting this, and this is all open source, but it was coming from law enforcement where we were seeing drones manipulated and possibly weaponized. So and just kind of hearing about different things, that there was just an attack in Mexico on the Army where there was a weaponized drone with a explosive attachment to it, and then something like the one you see on your screen there where it was a chemical attack as well. So seeing a lot of this stuff south of the border, and again, the concern is just kind of building as a team, sharing the resources. We all understand, like Administrator Huerta said, that there are a lot of uses for law enforcement for our combined search and rescue here in the mountains. We send drones out there to get to help people out. So we want to train people. We want to do everything we can correctly, but we've been building as a team to incorporate different detection systems. So it started with one here just at the airport, and it would kind of spread out. Other agencies have kind of tied in their systems with ours. So we have a bigger picture than a lot of communities. We've been fortunate in that way. And then again, just a few more pictures here where really simple stuff that you can buy at Best Buy. You can, we've seen stuff where explosives are tied underneath, pipe bombs. We've seen that, the reports of that in Mexico. So there's obviously being right near the border, that was a big concern for us. Realistically, we think that something like this is probably for most of the country is going to be the real threat. Somebody, hopefully not intentionally, but more than likely just what we've seen from the drone detections here around our airport, a collision with a commercial aircraft. And so it's mine and Brad's responsibility to protect our community, protect our friends and family who are flying out of here in any way we can. And so we are working as best we can with the federal partners within legislation. It's been slow, but there's so many airports out there that are working together. We have used Administrator Huerta's task force report to build our own tactical response plan. And I think, Jeffrey, if we can make you the point of contact if any of the airports out there need that, we'd be willing to share. We also share training on what was important to us, is, like I said before, was getting our 107 license, our commercial license for all the airport operators, everybody who's going to be responding, not only those who were using it, but we have about a dozen drones in our fleet. Yep, we're good with that. Thank you, Jeffrey. So we'll make that available to airports. We could share some training resources. We've had a lot of community outreach where we had the Los Angeles Regional Training Center help our community. So it's just this thing that we're trying to avoid here. More than likely is the threat, but we always have to have that nefarious intention. We always have to be aware of that. So like I said, when we first put this out there, you don't know what you have until you can get some eyes on here. This is one of the systems that we have that is just the detections from July to November of this year. And you could see this is our airport in here. I hope you can see my cursor. And we are just, we have drone incidents, and our Albuquerque Federal Standards District Office, the FISDO and the folks out there are absolutely wonderful. We could send the information we have. They're investigating. I do have to have a little disclaimer here that some of this right here is ours. So right at the approach and in the terminal, we do, like the Administrator Huerta said, it's a great tool. We are using the tools here to do inspections, even stuff to promote the airport. So, but a lot of the other drone detection out there, and you don't know what you don't know until you get some eyes on it. So this was one of the first tracks we saw. So we've had this in place since for about 3 years now, late 2018. And one of the really bad tracks that we had, because like Brad, most of the airports don't have the resources to have a full-time counter UAS system in place. Even we're sharing resources with other agencies, and something like this, this flight here originated a couple miles south of the airport. The drone operator, again, off the shelf, you could buy it at Best Buy, was able to cross 2 runways within about 1 minute and 30 seconds of Southwest landing on 26 left, that lower runway on the picture there. And our team was all in interviews, so we all missed this. We didn't respond in time. We were able to track this down. The FISDO in Albuquerque is actually investigating this right now, but this could have been just terrible. And it was a short flight, kind of went across and came back. I think the battery may have died, which sent it back to the home position. And then one of the things, so we do have several systems in place. Like I said here, one of the newest ones we were talking about that, we've been a pleasure to be with D-Fend is they're in Force Air, which is big for us because, like Administrator Huerta said, the first detections, the first, the counter US stuff was kinetic, and we're not really risking to pop a drone out of the sky and land in, near school or something like that. It'd be a lot of damage. So a lot of research, a lot of time. We finally found something that we teamed up with D-Fend to get a new program. There's no jamming, so it's safe. There's no kinetic, no shooting drones out of the sky, and really line of sight is not required. So very early in this stage of testing, we have an antenna located here, a long range antenna. We have the tactical antenna, and we have the covert vehicle. So just first week out, and like I said, we have a big system. We have multiple systems here. First week out, we were able to, on this top right-hand corner, one of the guys from D-Fend, Matt, and I were flying to see if we could pick something up. There were several overlaps. So this was the only system that picked it up, which tells us we just need more tools in the toolbox. There's no one system there that's going to catch everything. And I think during one of the first meetings, I think we talked to Administrator Huerta, and he talked about arrows in the quiver and having the right tools. And it's just, there's so many ways to get out there. I think this one was a good solution for us because it detected more in their library. They have more drones than the other systems we have in place. I think they're all important. We're looking at optical radar. So everything we can do legally, we're going to do. And, it's just our path forward. So this is kind of an overview of what the GUI looks like for us. And you can see the different antennas with the covert vehicle in here. really excited about this project. We have about 5 more weeks. So looking forward to working with the team. One of the other big things that I just urge you as much as possible to do any kind of community outreach to get those people who are out there buying stuff over at, you know, the big box stores. We are going to meet. We've had a permission and cooperation with our, again, local FSDO. This next coming week, we're going to hit the stores hard. We're going to ask everybody who's willing to pass out some information on where to fly, how to fly, all the rules. And we're just going to say, anytime you get somebody to fly a drone, please just give this information. It's all voluntary, but we're just trying to get it from every angle. So the sharing of information, sharing with other airports, as many detection systems as we can have out here, the community outreach, and just connecting with you guys, getting any better ideas. So that is all I have. If you guys have any questions, or if you need anything from us, like I said, if you want to just reach out to Jeffrey, we can get that for you. And I will stop sharing here and hand it over back over to you, Jeffrey.
Excellent. That really great perspective. Some unique environmental challenges and conditions in terms of your geography and terrain and topography and geopolitical environment and everything else, which makes it quite fascinating, and especially sharing some of those real life incidents that you had. So thank you very much for Tony. That was really, really great experience from the field. And now every airport is different, and they all have different environments and different factors around them. And now we're going to kind of move from Texas to Kansas, and a different environment. And we're going to hear from Brad Christopher from Wichita Airport. So Brad, we're happy to hear your story now. If you could share that.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate it. Let me share my screen, and we'll get this thing going. And let's see. Okay, everybody should have my screen up. And first, let me express my appreciation to D-Fend. I appreciate the invitation to share some information with you. It's an honor to share the panel with former Administrator Huerta and Tony Navarez. So welcome, good morning from Wichita, the air capital of the world, and let's get started. Best to look to the future, but sometimes it's productive to look to the past and see why why we're heading in the direction we are. So just a few brief comments on 5 major incidents, near misses, or of many. December 18, most of us are aware, it's been it was referenced previously, hundreds of flights were canceled at Gatwick Airport near London, England, following reports of drone sightings close to the runway. 140,000 passengers, 1,000 flights affected by the airport's closure of more than 33 hours. November 2019, remote pilot lost control of a drone that drifted over 2 miles at an altitude of 450 feet towards McCarran International Airport, where it landed a few feet away from an active runway. August 2020, JetBlue aircraft on final approach Boston Logan Airport nearly collides with an unauthorized drone flying at 8,000 feet. September 2021, EasyJet aircraft departing Manchester, England, nearly collides with an unauthorized drone. More recently, October 2021, drones laden with explosives targeted King Abdullah Airport and Aba Airport in Saudi Arabia. And with that terroristic attack or multiple injuries, one aircraft damaged on the ground. And most recently, although it's not aviation related, it's in the same category. You all may have seen recently in the media in November 2021, recently reported news that a drone attempted a malicious attack on an electrical power substation in Pennsylvania last year, just recently reported. So this isn't just localized threats to airports. Hey, moving on. What, on the case, governments and industry initiatives. Government and industry have gotten involved, taken this threat very seriously. In October 2018, Congress passed the Preventing Emergency Threats Act. The act provides authority for the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice to protect certain critical infrastructure and facilities when there is a credible threat to national security or public safety posed by a UAS. Neutralizing these threats does not require a warrant or judicial review and could include physically disabling a drone, intercepting communications, or seizure. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 requires the FAA to ensure the technologies used to detect and mitigate potential risk posed by UAS do not interfere with safe airport operations. The FAA does not currently allow the use of UAS countermeasure systems by non-federal authorities. However, that's a dynamic situation. That's changing, and so that's certainly one that bears watching. However, detection, tracking, identification, or as we refer to it as DTI, systems are authorized and encouraged. 2019, former Administrator Huerta is also a co-chair of that committee. The final report on UAS mitigation at airports. The task force included knowledgeable and respected leaders from the FAA, TSA, National Air Traffic Controllers Association, private sector, airport industry. It's a very helpful analysis and recommendations for airport endeavoring to develop their own local mitigation strategies. Again, I realize that's now a couple of years old, but still very relevant information. I'd highly recommend that review to anyone. Also, another very good resource on the histories in 2020, the Police Executive Research Forum, in cooperation with the Department of Justice, published a study, Drones, a report of the use of drones by public safety agencies and a wake-up call about the threat of malicious drone attacks. It's also a very helpful and insightful publication and report. Let's move on. Airports facing the wind, so headwinds. So what should airports be doing? Whether commercial or recreational, UAS are rapidly increasing in numbers with good intention applications. However, with new technology developed that enriches public benefit, also presents a potential for criminally malicious, reckless, disruptive, and irresponsible acts. And I found it interesting, the Blue Ribbon Task Force referred to this latter group as the careless and clueless. What a great description. As previously discussed, UAS in the hands of those with malevolent intentions have shown that they are capable of causing death, injury, and major disruptions. Airport operators, along with local agencies, including police departments, sheriff's departments, fire departments, emergency medical services, emergency management, are most certainly on the front lines and the first responders in defense against these threats. So what can local, I say local, non-federal agencies not legally do, at least as we know it today? We currently cannot deploy electronic countermeasures or other destructive or disabling measures against UAS. As I mentioned, that's a dynamic situation. We'll watch that closely as that may evolve. We cannot make arrests or unreasonably or illegally detain suspects that are violating federal laws. Airport operators, we do not have the luxury of assuming a wait and see or we'll figure it out if it happens approach to the potential of terroristic attacks, emergencies, disasters, or any other significant disruptions to air travel as anything that's defined in our airport emergency programs. So is this a wake-up call? Does your airport have a strategy? Let's continue. Further recommendations. I would suggest I'm like most, perhaps most of the webinar viewers today. Our agency is behind some airports, but ahead of others in our planning and preparation. Such airports as DFW, Tony's El Paso, Tampa, and a number of others are well ahead of most of us, and we can learn from these airports. So for airport operators who have not done so already, you would be well advised to contemplate the what would we do if scenarios. Find resources, do your homework. If you're viewing this session today, then you've already begun that process. Encourage local, state, federal agencies, including sheriff's departments, police departments, state patrol, city, county attorney's offices, FAA, FBI, TSA. The FAA is a regulatory agency without police power and authorized only to issue civil penalties and or suspend, revoke license privileges. The Department of Defense and agencies within the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice are the only agencies vested with the authority to deploy destructive or disabling countermeasures against airborne threats. Nonetheless, these agencies, federal agencies, recognize this is a shared responsibility, and local and state agencies are often in the best positions to rapidly respond and deter unauthorized UAS operations. Collaborate with these agencies and agree upon how, when, and under what circumstances unauthorized UAS and remote pilots will be countered. Under your non-federal legal limits, understand your non-federal legal limits, understand those, but also consider what authority you do have that could neutralize a threat. And these could be examples like under local law enforcement jurisdiction, perhaps be creative with the local laws you do have to work with that may have the same effect, such things as charges and detaining for trespass, reckless endangerment, criminal mischief, interference with law enforcement, voyeurism, peeping Tom laws. Again, in some cases, we may need to be creative and attempt to be productive and try to have the same effect of neutralizing a threat, and in this case, operators. In September of this year, the FAA issued Cert Alert number 2104. Updated guidance for airport emergency plans under 14 CFR 139-325, responding to unauthorized operations. That Cert Alert says airports must develop instructions for responding to unauthorized UAS, plan for disruptions by unauthorized UAS, and that should be accomplished similar to sabotage, hijack incidents. Coordinate a response with local air traffic, TSA, and other agencies. Train your employees. If seeking to install UAS detection systems and equipment, you've got to file the necessary 7860-1 under Part 77. And finally, the FAA says, quote, Part 139 airports without current response plans for unauthorized UAS operations need to begin the coordination process with the FAA in developing plans for responding to unlawful interference with operations by no later than September 30th, 2021. I'm not entirely sure what that type of deadline is intended, but that was the deadline presented. So finally, with that, I'd like to, excuse me, let's go back this one. See if we've got these covered. And finally, what should we do? In conclusion, what should all of this involve? Identify and partner with local, state, federal stakeholders. Develop your unauthorized UAS response plan. Explore DTI technologies. Plan realistic scenarios and tabletop your plan with stakeholders. Revisit your plan routinely. Finally, I've presented here just some helpful references that I found were very useful in our research and exploring this topic, helping us learn. So those are some that I would highly recommend in your evaluation. So thank you very much, and I will unscreen share.
Excellent. Great, Brad. That was really helpful. You presented some excellent detailed recommendations and kind of mini roadmaps, if you will, for what airports have been contending with and what they need to focus on going forward. So this was a great framework that Michael presented, and then some real insights from the field in terms of how two distinct airports have been contending with this, what sort of incidents they've faced, and what they've been doing from a planning and implementation perspective to go forward. We have a few questions in the time remaining. Let's see, Michael, the first one's from you, but it kind of builds on the point that Brad made. The most recent, one of the most recent FAA announcements regarding response plans and the need to put together a more formal or more official UAS response plan. On the one hand, it's a request to actually put together a plan. On the other hand, from what we can gather, there's not really a highly defined format or template. In that situation, what would you suggest? How would they? How should they? Should they just look for some open source frameworks of what other airports are doing, or what would be the best way to make sure that their plan is comprehensive enough?
A couple of suggestions. Yeah, that is one of the frustrations that I've heard from airports, that the rule, the requirement came out to develop a plan, but there was no real framework in terms of what should be involved in it. A useful place to start would be, as Brad mentioned, Appendix A of the Blue Ribbon Task Force on UAS mitigation at airports included an outline, a template that is a useful starting point. And Tony might want to talk about how they've dealt with that in El Paso, but that does provide a way to think about it, a series of questions and a set of factors that you should consider. Obviously, you're going to need to consider the unique features of your own airport, your location, and the nature of the traffic that you have, the surrounding areas, and all of that sort of stuff. But I would definitely start there. The other thing that I would also do is I'd encourage airports to talk to one another. There is a lot of learning that can take place and best practices. As we've all talked about, this is an evolving area. And not only is the threat evolving, but the technology itself is evolving. And airports can learn a lot from each other, as one airport might be trying one set of things, whereas another airport might be working with others. And those shared learnings are really important to broadly disseminate. And I'd encourage you to talk to each other one-on-one, but also through your trade associations, who are really keeping a close eye on this area, and certainly have resources that are available to their members.
Definitely. And we've seen that. I know we're very active in a number of those associations in terms of our own presentations and exhibitions and things like that. And you're right, it's taking an increasingly larger presence on the agenda of these associations. So that's a great place to learn. Michael, another question is, we know that airports have gone through a bit of a tough period economically with the COVID pandemic. And at the same time, though, these incidents are increasing, and at the same time, the regulatory requirements are increasing. So given that, and now, of course, we hope that we're in the midst of a rebound, and it does appear that we're being in a rebound. Is there a good way that airports can think of in terms of how to plan or pace their investment in new technologies that will be commensurate with the increase in traffic, with the new regulations, with the emerging threat, and kind of, in terms of looking at it also maybe in stages with detection and mitigation? And is there a good, framework for looking at that from an economic investment perspective?
Well, it's going to be very specific to your airport. The important thing, though, is not to bury your head in the sand. What you do need to develop is situational awareness of what is happening around your airport and how is that evolving. And I was quite taken with, for example, Tony's slide, that once they started looking, they actually saw that there was a lot of activity, and that's going to inform what you need to do about it. What are the partners you need to line up at the federal level, as well as your other local law enforcement partners around the airport? And so I don't think that you want to take that attitude of just waiting for something to happen and then you'll figure it out. Right. Awareness is very critical to helping to formulate that response plan. One of the things that Congress has directed the FAA to do is to develop standards. And I think over the longer term, the intent there is that those standards will then provide an opening for potential federal reimbursement out of the AIP program, the Airport Improvement Program, for the deployment of these systems. Now, I'm not saying you should wait for that to happen, but what you can do is keep an eye on the work that's taking place there, encourage the FAA to bring that work to a quick resolution, and to continue to consult with the airports in terms of what their learnings are that could help inform the development of those standards and to get them in place as quickly as possible.
Great. That's quite helpful. Another question, Tony, you can help with this one. You presented a lot of, basically you're starting with this new, with these implementation of these technologies, you're detecting and tracking a lot more, and it seems like you're gathering data and perhaps starting to notice, I guess, some trends. You showed examples of incidents, but in terms of have you been able to notice now any pattern in terms of, where the drones are taking off from, or the types and models of drones, or time of day, days of the week? Is a learning process taking place with the data that you're able to get actionable insights from?
Yes, sir, absolutely. So we have seen, so we have about 3 years worth of data now, and people much smarter than I, the University of Texas at El Paso, and a couple other folks have really been looking into it. But just on, for what we know at the airport, happy hour on Fridays, man, Fridays and Saturday nights, great day to fly, beautiful sunset, clear days. We had a snow day last February, drones everywhere, and you've got to worry about other things like icing, high winds, and in any kind of events. And we know, like I kind of mentioned before, where we do want to go out to the big box stores and say, please pass this literature out, because after the holidays, we're going to see a major uptick in drone use. And so, from really right after Black Friday to probably the 15th of July, the numbers just skyrocket. There are thousands of flights that we're picking up, and they're going all over your airport. But yeah, happy hours, 4th of July weekends, everybody wants to see fireworks. So we have those data, we have that kind of data, and we're looking at other systems. And I do want to really quickly talk about the UAS response plan to build on what Mr. Huerta said, was that blue ribbon task force really forces you, the template on there forces you to reach out and meet with your local feds and say, local fed and state partners, to say, what are we going to do, guys? And so that's kind of what we built ours on, and the template on there. And again, Jeffrey, more than happy to share with you. You made a great point. We can't be alone. And the starting point, we've built ours kind of generic, so that it's not meant to be, we have it in 3 phases, where it's a, low threat, medium threat, and high threat. And we base ours on the detection capabilities, but it can easily be used into visual, or to any kind of airport. So, but it really brings everybody to the table. And our ultimate, the end is to bring the federal partners, since the airport doesn't have the authority to kind of flip that switch to bring that drone safely down, is we need our federal partners. So we're engaging with them, and they have the authority. They, we obviously, we're not bringing drones down with D-Fend. We're doing the crawl, walk, and run method. So, but having that that foundation out there, meeting with your partners, and like Brad talked about, having tabletops is just, it's critical. And then for us to be talking to each other, and every airport that's come on here, we're going to have an opportunity. I think we teamed up with you guys. If anybody wants to come see what we have available, talk, chat, please, man, I'm more than willing to help you guys out any way I can.
Excellent. Great points in terms of, and that's why we're fostering this webinar series, is exactly to be an industry resource and to foster this kind of best practices and knowledge sharing across airports. And we appreciate your generous offer in that regard. You also made a great point about, obviously being cognizant of what local and what airport authorities can do, and when to bring in the federal responsibilities and so forth. Now, Brad, I have a question. In terms of, I've been asked, how did you guys organize internally to start dealing with these plans, well, the threats and the plans? Do you have like a cross-functional committee, or is it all on you, or do you interface with other departments at the airport? Is there like a task force? How do you organize to mobilize around this emerging issue?
Excellent question, Jeffrey. And I would say Wichita Airport Authority is still in its infancy. We're taking baby steps. I can tell you that we learned a lot from El Paso, from Tony's organization, also Tampa. But the FAA's CERT alert came out, I believe it was September 21st. We actually published and issued our SOP for the UAS response plan, ours in the form of an SOP, I think 2 days before that actually came out. So, and let me emphasize too, we also use the template from the task force. That's Appendix A, as a part of that final report. I believe El Paso used that. We also use the same template. To speak to your question, Jeffrey, we're still working through that. Right now, our plan is fairly new. Last week we had a tabletop with the TSA and some other agencies, and we're still in the process of reaching out to other local agencies, federal agencies, and working through that right now. if I could add one other thing, the significance of the CERT alert, keep in mind what I would encourage viewers and airports to think about is through that CERT alert, what that essentially does is that requires us through the FAA to add a response plan to our airport certification manuals under the airport emergency plan. And they've said, think of it as sabotage or hijack, which is one of the disasters, one of the incidents that we must address in our airport emergency plan. So they've given us some bullet points of things that we have to address, but keep in mind this response plan, just like your airport emergency plan or airport security plan for that matter, is not a one size fits all. It needs to adapt to the dynamics of your local airport. Obviously, there's some common threads, some consistencies and SOPs, but it's really designed to tailor to the needs, the demands of your airport. I would just encourage airports that will certainly do that. Certificated airports will accomplish that, as the FAA has instructed them to do, but don't check the box, if you will. I would encourage you to go beyond and above that, as El Paso has done and many others, and we're endeavoring to do.
Great. Great insights. I know we're beyond the end of the hour. I know there are still some questions coming in, interesting questions, especially from not just from the U.S., from Europe, about who buys the system. Is it federal, local, private? And other questions about, should there be an international response? These are great questions, maybe for the next webinar. And I know they're quite complex and vary a lot from country to country. I think Michael described earlier that while airports may be making their own investments, there's also going to be programs for, I don't know if subsidy is the right word, but the sharing of investment to deal with this threat. So it's quite a complex issue that we'll probably maybe discuss in a future webinar. Well, that was great. We heard some excellent frameworks. We saw some real life incidents, history, what best practices are being adopted, what can be done now, and what can be done in the future as the regulatory frameworks change. And we heard it, distinct impressions from a number of different airports. And to Tony's point, I think we're going to continue to foster and collaborate this sort of education, best practices, market education, and knowledge and information and education exchange. And that's it for now. Thank you again very much, Michael and Brad and Tony, for sharing your experiences and great knowledge. And we'll continue this dialogue. And thank you all for signing in and for joining us for this fascinating discussion about the never-ending, constantly evolving drone threat at airports. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.